On America's Voice.news, on the John Fredericks Radio Network, on G News and GTV, blown through the CCP's firewall, subtitled in Mandarin, and later in the day on Newsmax TV. You're in the War Room with Raheem Kassam, Jack Maxey, Vish Burra, and Mark Simon manages to prioritize us, and we're very, very grateful for it, and stay on the line with us as a holdover from the last hour. Episode 330 of War Room Pandemic starts here and now live from Capitol Hill. And I want to say a special thank you to our audience out there. You guys, I have noticed a serious uptick in the amounts of shares and subscriptions and likes and everything that you guys are doing to make sure this show reaches more and more people. And it is because of great guests like Dr. Pillsbury and like Mark Simon that I know you guys, and Dr. Yan and all these great heroes, and of course the Jack Maxey rants. I know that this is something that's incredibly close to your heart, and I want to just take a moment to appreciate everything that you guys are doing to make sure that this show reaches more and more people. I want to throw it over back to you, Jack and Mark. Now, take us away.
Hey, Mark, one of the things when I was watching the share price, which was so interesting, I looked at the Bloomberg Analytics, and almost every purchase was under 10,000 shares. So this truly was a retail response to, I called it like one of the greatest protest trades in history, maybe the only protest trade in history that I know of, but it really was quite poignant. Also, I wanted to talk to you about, I don't know if you saw, the Global Times had an editorial this morning essentially accusing Jimmy Lai of being a collaborator with the evil U.S., that the U.S.'s intention is to destabilize Hong Kong with this talk of democracy. And they also claim that the only thing that Hong Kong needs to do is abide by the one country, two systems, which seems to be exactly what they have destroyed in the last couple weeks. I wonder if you could just talk to our viewers about what can we do to help support Apple Daily, to help support the Chinese students in Hong Kong who are protesting, and to help make sure that these people who are under the gun of the CCP in Hong Kong can remain safe. How do we help them do that?
Well, I mean, if you're looking to support Apple Daily, it's hard to buy a paper, and most of your readers probably don't read Chinese, but we do have an English language section if you go to our website. Unfortunately, I'm not the greatest marketer on television right now, so I don't have it with me. But if you go Apple Daily English online, there is a small subscription. It's $5 a month, and you will get from Hong Kong some of the best commentary and also the up-to-date Hong Kong news. And that's one way. The other way, quite frankly, is to be blunt, is I'm not shining shoes here, is to listen to shows, listen to your show. When you were talking about the Global Times, one of the things that happens sometimes, and I don't know if you have this feeling, sometimes when you talk to people about the Chinese Communist Party, they look at you like you're from Mars, because how can people believe such things? They look at you and say, how can you believe that nobody would lie like that? The fact is they do lie like that. The Global Times said, all you have to do is live by the two systems, one country rule, quote unquote, as defined by us. And that means that basically you live by their rules. So I think it's nearly impossible to overstate how dishonest they can be. And the wonderful thing about it is when you actually meet them, and sometimes I do, or you meet these correspondents, they actually just look at you when you actually ask them, say, how can you write this stuff? They go, oh, I just send them the facts, and then they write that back in Beijing. They basically absolve themselves of all responsibility. And that's one of the things that the Communist Party always wants the American people to do. Oh, we trade with them well. They buy some of our stuff, buy some grains. They help our financial companies. So that absolves you. You're doing some good. This helps a few Chinese people over there. The point is, this is an evil regime. And I always tell people, it's not, can I tell if it's 1989 or 1939? I just don't know if it's 1936 or 1937. In other words, I think we know where we're heading. If you come out to Southeast Asia, which, I traveled around fairly frequently before COVID, the understanding that people have of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is really something that I think would shock a lot of people in America. They don't publicly talk about it all the time because they do business, but you meet senior executives, very senior government officials, and once you start talking about China, they see the exact same thing that you guys are talking about every day. The other issue is, and it comes back to Hong Kong, is how can you support Hong Kong? Because if you support Hong Kong, you support Apple Daily. In other words, as long as they have to keep Hong Kong running as a financial center and Hong Kong running for whatever reason they deem, they have to keep a free press, and they have to keep a press that can work. The day they decide they don't need Hong Kong to solve any of these matters is the day they get rid of Apple Daily. And we saw that the other day when they sent those officers in there. And that's why you had that visceral response from across the board in the public. That's why you had, for the first time ever, I heard from some businessmen who I consider moderately pro-Beijing. The first time they were like, oh my God, they're actually doing it. And that's what people saw. I know sometimes, we saw an attack on the free press, but in Hong Kong, people were like, okay, they're taking out Apple Daily. Once they take out Apple Daily, nobody's going to tell our story anymore, and then they'll wrap up the small guys really quickly. That's what people saw. And Hong Kong isn't a situation at this point in time where really, they could do it in probably a week. They could take us out in a week if they wanted to, the entire city. And, when people say to me the PLA is not there, that's laughable. You saw the instrument of the PLA walk through our offices the other day. It was just the Hong Kong police force. That's not the Hong Kong police force of old. This is not the Hong Kong police force that, I remember from even 10 years ago.
Mark,
completely changed. The senior officers have all changed over.
I want to interject on that because to me it's something very much of a tell. If you were to go back in the history of the 20th century, probably the Hong Kong police force was recognized globally as one of the best police forces in the world. Yeah. And they were specifically known in a region with a lot of corruption as being this police force with tremendous integrity. You could even go back and find old radio shows from the 30s talking about like the Hong Kong police force, the best in the world, kind of like the Scotland Yard of Asia. And to see this institution be corrupted over time is kind of sad. It's a real example of the change that we've watched go on in Hong Kong in the last 40 years.
That is such a good point. We used to have a joke in the American community that when you're in Asia, I remember one time I was in Indonesia and we had an interaction with the police force, and a guy looked over to me and he said, "Send Lassie to get the state police." You guys remember in the old movies, like when the corrupt sheriff was the problem and they had to go get the state police or something like that. I'm not kidding. I have to tell people. This was a place, and I actually played when I was younger, not as fat as I am now. When I was younger, I used to play on the police rugby team for a while. And, it was this place where, these guys were proud, they were honest, you didn't have, nobody, they were honest, they didn't have the police, basically asking for bribes. And it was structured that way too. In other words, in Hong Kong, if you get a speeding ticket, it's 300 Hong Kong dollars. That's about 45 US bucks. And we pay our policemen well, so you don't have to worry about a guy asking for a bribe. In other words, they set it up correctly. And they destroy institution after institution. Just the other day we had, and the guy was a good guy. His name was David Lung. He was the chief of public prosecutions. Now, this is the guy who wouldn't prosecute demonstrators as actively as the Chinese wanted. And so then they brought in the national security law, and magically his department was not placed in charge of this because they were not happy that they didn't believe he would make prosecutions based on political decisions. So he resigned. So what are they doing to him now? They're revealing that maybe he's not such a good guy. Maybe he was evil. Maybe he did collude with other people. As far as Jimmy goes, Jimmy Lai has been around and running around the world for many, many years. He loves New York. He's been in New York forever. He lived in San Francisco for a while. He vacations in the U.S. regularly. One of his favorite places is going down to the Inlet Little Washington in Virginia, who they reached out to make sure he was okay. Wow. He's not a complicated man, and he was truly very good friends with Milton Friedman. Not just, knew Milton Friedman, was truly very good friends with him. First person Rose called when Milton died was Jimmy. Jimmy got on a plane and flew over to help take care of Rose. And the point that I'm making is that please understand how evil they are. 4 of the guys they arrested the other day work for me. They technically report up to me. And, they arrested my head of animation. They arrested the head of the administration department, a guy who is actually deaf. They arrested people who had nothing to do with any content, any politics, anything. And they charged them with the national security law. They came into their homes and they searched their homes and they intimidated their families. And that's what they do. And that's the reason why you had this response. People say, hey, if they can go after Jimmy Lai, oh my God, he's a big wheel. That means they'll go after anybody. But then they followed it up. That's the insidiousness of the communists. They picked up basically a lot of small fish. And what we have that they don't have is we have the financial ability, along with some friends, to get the lawyers in to help these people. Imagine if you're driving a truck and you're carrying documents for a pro-democracy rally, and you don't know they're in there, you just bring them in, and they charge you. It's not cheap. It's not cheap at all. They can make your life a living hell financially. They can bust you.
And even
I
with,
have to say, I think.
Well, I was going to say, even with the money, you might have the best lawyers in the world, but that doesn't guarantee you justice under the system now, right? I mean, they're going to make decisions based upon the needs of the party, not on the balances of the scales of justice.
No, I mean, I think that's one of the things that we really have to, people. It's hard for people to understand. It's my kids sometimes, because my kids were in Hong Kong and when we were harassed and we moved out. The one thing the Communist Party has done for my children is my kids have actually, unlike so many, they've seen real evil. In other words, I'm not criticizing. I don't want to talk U.S. politics, but sometimes I see young people in the streets screaming about what they perceive as an injustice. And I'm like, let me tell you something. I had 16-year-old girls in City University, because my phone number is fairly out there, calling me, begging me, Mr. Simon, you got to help us. They really thought the police were coming to kill them. Now, you can say they weren't, but the perception of those young kids was they're coming to get it. They're coming to get us. And the people they were asking for help they were saying, can you have the American people help us? I mean, a girl was asking me to call President Trump, and I'm saying, I'm sorry, I don't have that pull, but, there's just no trust. And all of Hong Kong was waiting for something horrible to happen, because with the communists, something always will happen. In other words, they learn from their mistakes and they become more evil.
Hey, Mark, we're going to have to go to a break here.
And your show today,
I just want to thank you so much, because some of this is so key for people to understand that this really is an argument between light and darkness, and everybody's going to have to stand up and be counted. And you can look for inspiration to like Dr.
Absolutely.
Yan from the Hong Kong University. She told us the same thing as you. She told us that she came around because she realized that there was not a single evil thing that they were not capable of when she started getting threatened with her safety in early January just by asking questions. Now, listen, Mark, thank you so much. God bless you, man. We got your 6, and we're going to get Apple Daily out to the whole world. Back in just a minute.
Right, we want to thank Mark Simon again. We know all of you guys are grateful for him joining us for the extended segment. Thanks to the CCP Gremlins. You did it. You made it a longer segment, CCP. See you in a second.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room here on August the 12th, the year of our Lord 2020. And 2020 has been a gut punch to American business, and if you're going to succeed, you need every possible advantage. One of the sponsors of this show is NetSuite by Oracle, the world's #1 cloud business system. Get your free guide right now at netsuite.com/Bannon. Bannon. Okay, Jack, Maxie, that was a fantastic couple of segments with Mark Simon there, and I really want to thank the Chinese Communist Party for intervening in the last hour, because it meant that we rejigged it and spent even more time with Mark Simon talking about what's happening in Hong Kong, what's happening with Apple Daily, and beyond. And we'll obviously be cutting those clips up, making sure they get out to a wider audience on Parler, on Twitter, across social media, and we like and hope and want you to continue sharing them out there, ladies and gentlemen. That is your job, your homework every day. We'll do the heavy lift, okay? You just back us up. It's actually the other way when you think about it. The ordinary people out there are the ones doing the heavy lift. We just sit here and talk. They're doing the heavy lift every day. Okay, just a little bit more lift for you guys is just sharing everything out there for us. We've got a lot to get to in this hour here, especially since we had to combine and rejig certain things. So I want to bring on now Natalie Winters from this little-known website, The National Pulse, thenationalpulse.com. And Natalie is a senior writer at The Pulse, somebody I have been working with now, had the pleasure of working with for just about a year, maybe over a year, Natalie. You have done some of the most effective reporting on Chinese Communist Party influence in Western institutions. And one of these recently minted institutions, I guess, was TikTok. Now, TikTok established a massive foothold in the Western world, especially amongst younger people. But the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is taking action against TikTok, stopping the Chinese Communist Party linked app from operating in maybe about 40 days time is the deadline that he's set. Still a little too long in my books, but you play the cards you're dealt. But the people on TikTok, the influencers on TikTok, the people who have massive followings and really drive traffic to TikTok, Natalie, are they leaving en masse?
Yes, like you said, TikTok is certainly a 1-2 punch. Not only is it a social media network that's thinly veiled as a data collection service, but it also is used to, as the founder and CEO says, promote socialist core values and censor content that goes against Chinese Communist Party narratives. And what you've been seeing is a mass exodus, or at least the beginnings of one, from a lot of the content creators on the platform. They're now flocking to American alternatives, such as Reels and other short video apps. And basically, this is showing you that I think a decoupling from China, albeit TikTok is a small company in the broader landscape of things, but that it is indeed possible, and that Americans, when they're confronted with the information about what the Chinese Communist Party is and how they abuse human rights and how they've harmed American workers, and really what they do on a global stage with respect to both of those things, that people don't want to participate in that criminal enterprise or see their data be stolen by the Chinese Communist Party.
So, Natalie, talk to us a little bit about this story that's just gone up on the National Pulse. The TikTok influence doesn't end just with its own influencers, and certainly doesn't just end with influencing the people that are subscribed to the app. Also, TikTok is collaborating with an organization that we've talked about before, that we've highlighted before. And remember, I want us to wash, rinse, repeat these stories and repeat them in full, because there are so many things out there, so many new viewers of this show, and those two things don't necessarily always go together. People may not have heard of lead stories, right? And I want to explain to people what lead stories is, who they're run by, who they donate to, who they work with, and their recent partnership with TikTok, and what they did just days after announcing this recent partnership with TikTok. Natalie, take it away.
Sure. Well, Lead Stories purports to be an independent fact-checking organization that's employed by the likes of Facebook and, as you said, TikTok. But what we've discovered at the National Pulse, and this was a few months back after they censored one of our articles on the financial ties between the Black Lives Matter donations processing platform and that of the Biden campaign. So they censored that article, and we dug into the board and staff members of this entity, which again purports to be independent. But when you really take a deep dive into kind of the who's who of this organization, you see that there's over 120 years worth of shared experience at the left-wing establishment outlet CNN. Its founder is a former editor there, and of every federal donation that has been sent to a candidate They have exclusively gone to Democrats, and you're talking tens of thousands of dollars. So certainly not deserving of the independent or nonpartisan label that Facebook, whenever Lead Stories decides to censor an article, which then gets shrouded with a veil, which directly impacts the flow of traffic. Certainly not the independent fact-checking platform that it's portrayed to be. But recently, TikTok, Chinese Communist Party compromised TikTok, enlisted Lead Stories to, quote, monitor misinformation about the 2020 election. And just days after taking a page, frankly, out of the Chinese Communist Party's book of censorship, they censored a National Pulse story on how Nancy Pelosi said, confirming the recent U.S. government report that China would prefer Joe Biden to win the presidency over President Trump. So that article is now censored on Facebook. When users see it, there's a big glaring label that says this information is partly false. And when you click on it, you're rerouted to Lead Stories' attempt to debunk the story, which
Natalie,
not to yes.
I just want to hone in on something you just said there. This is the way this organization works. Okay, let's be very clear about this, ladies and gentlemen. Lead Stories is based abroad. It is not here in the United States. They have people in the United States, but they themselves say they're basically based in Belgium, and their founder's Belgian, and they make this. They make their money through an app called Trendalizer, which is based in Belgium. Okay, foreign organization being used by Facebook and in collaboration with the Chinese Communist Party linked TikTok app, the same one that President Trump rightly wants out of the United States and wants the influence of out of US elections. Those guys are the ones in charge for Facebook of monitoring fake news. Now, Natalie, we've got this article up about this whole thing because I really want everybody out there to read it in depth and share it with all your friends and family members, because when people see a message from Facebook that says, hey, this article that you're sharing is fake news, please read about why, they're then sent to a different website than the one that they have chosen to receive in their Facebook newsfeed. For instance, if you guys out there like the National Pulse on Facebook, you expect to see National Pulse stories in your feed, but no. Facebook and Lead Stories want you to then go to the Lead Stories website and read about why our reporting is fake news in their opinion. And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to their opinion. See, fact checkers are supposed to check the facts, Natalie. Fact checkers are not there to make a distinction about my editorial decisions on the site, about my opinions that go on the site. They're not there to say, oh, this news outlet approached this story from this angle and we disagree with it, therefore we're going to censor it. And it's just days after they announce a partnership with a Chinese Communist Party linked app that they're censoring stories about the Chinese Communist Party and about Chinese Communist Party influence in the US elections. That is compromised. That is collaborating. Lead Stories is a running dog of the Chinese Communist Party, and Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg are paying these people, paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars to fact check things that are on Facebook pertaining to the US election. This is no small story. This is a national scandal. And I don't understand, Natalie, why every single Republican congressman, why every single Republican senator, and why the White House doesn't take up the mantle on this. Because it is a disgrace that you have Facebook, a supposedly American company founded by a supposed American who is using a Chinese communist-linked company now to censor stories about a national election. Oh, and guess what? The two articles that they have chosen to censor by the National Pulse, thank you, Jack Maxey, are articles about Joe Biden and articles about Black Lives Matter and articles about Nancy Pelosi. Nothing on the right, nothing to the political right. They are simply concerned with defending the Democratic Party of America, which, guess what? China wants to win this presidential election. Natalie, 90 seconds, back over to you.
Well, there's also something sinister, too, when you look at the fact that Facebook has partnered with a host of Chinese Communist Party-linked entities. Just over the last week, we've put up a barrage of stories on tech conferences that occur in China, where you've seen participants such as Huawei deemed Chinese military collaborators by the Department of Defense, and even companies like Tencent And what's more, TikTok, which are set to be banned by the Trump administration. And you've seen Facebook openly participate in these conferences. But also, they're taking a playbook out of what the mainstream media does, and frankly, what the Chinese Communist Party does, is that they want Americans to believe that these entities are independent, nonpartisan, they don't have paymasters, and they're not running dogs for someone else, whether it's the Chinese Communist Party or big tech. Right? When you see Fareed Zakaria go up on CNN and give these long diatribes about how the United States is becoming more like China and saying that blaming China for coronavirus is unfairly scapegoating the country, what you're not saying is that he's participated in a Chinese government-funded Marxist journalism school since at least 2017, and he's on the board of an organization alongside a host of Chinese Communist Party apparatchiks. And again, they want you to believe that these people are independent, and what they're saying is holier than thou. There's no ulterior motives here. But as you see with lead stories, as you see with establishment media organizations, and even, frankly, politicians who, like you say, are too often on the payroll of these entities like Facebook and Google, they're not the independent voices that they're purporting to be.
Natalie, thank you so much for joining us here in this segment. At Natalie G. Winters on Twitter, on Parler, and beyond. Make sure you check out Natalie's reporting over at the National Pulse. Back with Jack Maxey, Vish Bora, Raheem Kassam. Just a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Well, 2020 has been a gut punch to American business, and if you're going to succeed, you need every possible advantage. NetSuite by Oracle is the world's #1 cloud business system, a sponsor of War Room Pandemic. Smart companies run on NetSuite because NetSuite gives you the visibility and control of your financials, your HR, your inventory, your e-commerce, and more. Everything you need, all in one place. So whether you're doing a million or hundreds of millions in sales, NetSuite lets you manage every penny with precision. With NetSuite, you have the agility to compete with anyone, work from anywhere, and run your whole company right from your phone. So join over 20,000 companies who trust NetSuite to make it happen for them. They actually surveyed hundreds of business leaders across the United States and assembled a free playbook of the top strategies they're using as America reopens for business. And you can get that free guide right now. 7 actions businesses need to take. And schedule a free product tour at netsuite.com/Bannon. That's netsuite.com/BANNON. Well, welcome back. I know there's a lot of people in the chat who have been saying over the course of this hour, bring Steve back. We want Steve back. And we do too. And the tech gremlins got the better of us today, so we're having to continue the show but I did get a lot of positive feedback yesterday on the second hour of the show. People saying they like the chill vibe more. I think that's the vibe you bring, isn't it? Or is that spicy? You bring spicy. Maybe Jack brings chill. I don't know. I want to get into this right now. I've been teasing it the whole show, and it really is one of the best articles I've read about this pandemic in quite some time. Interestingly enough, not at an outlet that I read particularly often. It's in The Atlantic, on the Atlantic magazine's website. It is called How the Pandemic Revealed Britain's National Illness. And I talked to Steve about this offline before the show. And often when we bring stories from the United Kingdom or elsewhere in Europe, the question is often asked of me, what relevance does this have to a majority US audience? Well, it has many, many ramifications, not least given the recommendations that were given to Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the ones he took, i.e. all of them, versus, say, President Trump, who has been skeptical of some of the more hardline scientific voices in his administration who are trying to do things in a very technocratic way. But I want to start you off and bring the boys in on this conversation as well with this line that really, really struck a chord with me. It says, Britain may have just been unlucky in the number of holiday makers it had returning from the wrong places at the wrong times. Britain is also more densely populated than any other country in Europe, with its preeminent city and busiest airport like a Silk Road port at the time of the plague. London is a 21st century global hub, unlike anywhere else in the region. And like a Silk Road port at the time of the plague is a particularly good way to talk about these hyper-densely populated and high infrastructure areas that have fallen foul of coronavirus, of CCP virus efficiencies, Jack. I mean, you saw this in New York, you see it in London, you see it in a swathe of population centers across the Western world. And I take a step back from all this and try and think about what the pandemic is teaching us about the general way that we're setting up our societies and living our lives, and what this continues to tell me throughout this article. Remember, The Atlantic is a left-wing globalist magazine, and effectively what they're saying is, you got too many people all in one place. That's bad central planning.
Well, I mean, this is the problem that goes back 2,000 years with plagues, right? You're going to be hit harder in an urban environment just because there's more exposure. And we saw
You talked about this right at the beginning.
Yeah, we saw this at the very beginning. And even if they're two different diseases, okay, let's just be clear, the pandemic of 1918 and the pandemic of this era. But you can actually go and look, even in the United States, at the cities that were hit hard in that pandemic, and you will find it was the same cities that were hit hard in this pandemic. I want to say, Raheem, and I've been saying it for a long time, there's a certain kind of inevitability about this virus. And what we're seeing, I think, all around the world is that despite the best efforts to lock things down, we still see the mortalities end up being in the same age group. I mean, for example, you could compare the United Kingdom to, I know everybody wants to always hammer Sweden, but the UK has a much higher fatality rate than does Sweden.
Right. It's actually the highest, the worst COVID-19 death toll in Europe is the United Kingdom, with more than 46,000 dead now.
Belgium is a little bit worse. They have 86 per 100,000, wow. And Britain has 70.
But Belgium's not a real country, so...
This could be true. He's going to start another war in continental Europe here with his comments. But I think that one of the things that we have to understand as we look at this virus, and I've said it for a while, when we talk about flattening the curve, what you have to understand is the number of infected under that curve does not change, whether that curve is a giant spike or a gentle hillside that is stretched out over months and months. And I think that one of the things that we're going to see in some of these countries that really got hammered hard very early, like Italy, for example, is kind of back to work. And in a way, it might be because they failed so badly, at least according to the popular opinions of how you were supposed to do it. And we're seeing the same thing in Sweden. Sweden has almost no deaths now. Very similar to New York City, actually. And New York City was a disaster. But the virus ran through the population. And in Stockholm, for example, we're seeing a antibody rate of roughly 20 to 30%. You've got the chief virologist in Sweden claiming that he thinks they're very near to a kind of herd immunity. Now, one of the things that people have to understand when we talk about herd immunity and this disease, many people who are exposed to it, particularly ones who may have gotten a small dose, a small viral load in their initial exposure, have created a kind of immunity, but it doesn't necessarily develop into outright antibodies that we can test for, i.e. the T cells, though, remember the disease and can replicate a viral response when necessary. One other thing that I think is very fascinating, people should know this, there are about half a dozen coronaviruses that have been moving around in the human population for decades, and they are part of the annual kind of flu season. And what they're starting to speculate now is that there are very many people who may have a kind of innate immunity to COVID-19 because of multiple exposures to these other corona-type viruses. So I actually am, I'm a believer that we got to open up. I'm a believer that we look at the statistics. It doesn't matter if it's Sweden or if it's New York or Des Moines. Right. The people who are going to die are 65 and above. We actually, I went and did a little more research about infant mortality or childhood mortality in the United States. I went to the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they had some more information. And yes, it is somewhat dangerous for kids, but it's certainly not nearly as dangerous as seasonal flu, at least on a numeric basis.
To the children.
To the children. And in fact, as we go forward in this, you have to look at it. The case fatality in the United States from its height in April to today has almost dropped in half. Right. And this is largely, Raheem, and we've said this many times, and it's something that I think everybody should acknowledge. I know this 6 months feels like it's been 6 years, and I'm ready to blast out of this. But you have to remember, Western science has only had their hands on this disease now for 6 months.
Well, the question is, have they had their hands on the disease? I mean, the original, code of it, we still don't have.
Well, here's the thing. Whether we have the original code or not, modern science has certainly gotten each of the 12 different, various strains of this virus that are going around the world. We have our hands on it. We're looking at it.
Well, you say that. I mean, I do want to get back into this a little bit as well, because there are so many parts of it, and not to diminish anything you're saying, but I think it all relates. So I want to bring it back. Like I said in the first hour, what Tom McTague, who's the excellent author of this Atlantic piece, says is that, like much of the Western world, Britain had prepared for an influenza pandemic, whereas places that were hit earlier, Hong Kong, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, had readied themselves for the type of respiratory illness that COVID-19 turned out to be. And interestingly as well, I think the focus on what we've seen across the Western world here between the health systems versus the nursing homes, the care homes, is a major part of this article also. And just the lack of preparation in those senses really stuck out to me here as well. Now, Tom identifies in here something that I've said for a very long time, and I get hit by the UK press every time I mention this, which is that we focus on protecting the National Health Service rather than the National Health Service protecting Britons. It's like we defend the institution itself more than the institution actually services the British public. And he says here that we failed in our preparation, we failed in our diagnosis, and we failed in our treatment of everything that we had prepared for here. Interestingly, there are major geopolitical ramifications here, and if we need to bleed this into the next segment, we can do as well. But he talks about how the NHS has been stretched and fragmented, its lines of authority and responsibility tangled by years of regulatory tinkering. It says outside London, the country's economy was unproductive and poor, and its elderly care system an unreformed national disgrace. The civil service, which believed itself to be the best in the world, had become a shadow of its former self, almost entirely shorn of the ability to operationally or think strategically. Its centre, hollowed out, weak, and ineffective. And isn't that just what we had been saying all the way up to the 2016 European Union referendum vote? That our core competencies of a nation had been shorn away by the European Union, exported to Brussels in that fake country of Belgium, and now we are living through the eventualities of it, the eventualities of rampant globalism. And just lastly, before I throw it back over to you guys, I want to make mention of these things here. British calamities, including policy misjudgments, have been eye-watering over the last couple of decades. The disaster of Iraq, the botched Libyan intervention in 2011, the near miss of Scottish independence in 2014, and the woeful handling, and it was woeful handling, of Britain's divorce from the European Union from 2016 onward. Basically, Britain was in the worst potential scenario it could have been in to deal with a pandemic.
Well, I agree they had a horrible go of it, but the whole world has had a horrible go of this, Raheem. And I think one of the things that we have to recognize, particularly as we look back on this and we try and learn some lessons, most of the damage that has been caused around the world has been because, I believe, of overreaction in almost every country. I mean, think about this. The whole world has shut down, and I don't want to discount the value of human life. I mean, you hear me. I'm a spiritual person, and I believe we're all made in the image of God.
Right.
But the entire world has collapsed for a number of deaths that really, in the grand scheme of human history, is not that great. But the damage done
Jack,
by this is comparable to any of the major wars in history.
I'm just going to
without the dead.
I'm just going to channel Steve here. And reiterate what he said the other day. The majority of deaths being the most vulnerable people in our society. And if we cannot protect the most vulnerable people in our society, we ain't a society at all.
No. I'm not in disagreement with you. And we can go back to episode, I think, 6, where I said the fundamental responsibility of the United States when we saw the first mortalities out of China. And they really have not changed. Who's going to die has not changed from the first Lancet reports. I said the objective should be to circle the old age homes, make sure that those people are protected. And almost every single Western country, whether it was the NIH in Britain, whether it was the socialized medicine in Sweden, or whether it was the United States, failed in that regard
Right.
dramatically.
Right. We'll continue on a little bit about this. I know the audience has been asking what happened to our Kamala coverage. She's just not that interesting. But we will talk about it after the break. I want to make clear as well what this report, this Atlantic article says, you guys should all read it, is about the manufacturing base that Germany still maintains that kind of helped them to produce medical supplies. Oh yeah, Britain farmed all that out, outsourced it out, China, elsewhere, because Brussels told us to. We'll be right back.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room. Just want to conclude with this. I said there were lessons to be learned, and the lessons to be learned out of this Atlantic article are globalism, bad, centralization doesn't work, and interestingly enough, the author of this article goes after Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister. He says Johnson's strategy throughout was one that his hero, Sir Winston Churchill, raged against during the First World War when he concluded that generals had been given too much power by politicians. And this is a commentary about how much Boris Johnson listened to the scientific establishment in the United Kingdom. And actually, he mentions in this article that Johnson failed, like Trump did and like Bolsonaro did. Johnson failed to challenge his experts' strategy. And I think this is going to become crucial. You know, the leaders not leading during this pandemic is going to become one of the key narratives that I think work their way out. And Boris Johnson, I warned you all, by the way, a year plus ago, when everybody thought Boris Johnson was Britain's answer to Donald Trump. I warned you all. I told you he was just a libertarian goon. And we've seen that now. I want to pivot now to another goon. So we did the whole second hour yesterday waiting for Joe Biden's vice presidential pick announcement. It turned out that the announcement actually came later on in the day, and it was kind of a damp squib in the end. People were expecting either a real outlier, like a real surprise, a Pete Buttigieg or just something totally out of left field, or the kind of stock selection, which would have been a Susan Rice, maybe a Kamala Harris. But it was Kamala Harris, and everyone just kind of went, eh. And you could hear it across the entirety of Washington, D.C., especially from Democrats, who went, eh. And nobody cares about Kamala Harris. Why? Because Kamala Harris is fundamentally boring. But fundamentally boring, guys, can sometimes be dangerous, because it lowers our guard. And if there's anything we know about Kamala Harris, is that she is incredibly overambitious and wants to go further and further and further all the time, whether it's further to the left or further to the authoritarianism that she, acted with as a district attorney. Kamala Harris, I mean, I just don't get the pick, you know?
I think first of all that Biden was backed into his corner, as I mentioned yesterday, and then he went, as you mentioned yesterday on the show, he went by the book.
Yeah.
Right. It was just, Kamala Harris was pretty obvious, and that's why you get that sort of damp rag reaction.
Yeah.
Right. But interestingly enough, we might see her as boring, but I actually find her very unlikable, which is a huge problem, I think, in this race. In fact, yesterday when MSNBC announced Kamala's pick, they put up a Morning Consult Politico poll right next to, right on the side of the screen, taken from July 10th to 12th. 66% of voters had already made up their minds about Kamala Harris to this point. 32% find her favorable. 34% find her unfavorable. 14% have heard of her but have no opinion of her, and then 20% have actually never heard of her. Now, the idea here is that Kamala is going to be the one who's going to be doing all the campaigning on the trail, right? Joe Biden's stuck in his basement. But, it's sort of a weird comparison to 2016. Nobody really knew who Mike Pence was. I think at the time.
I think more people than Kamala Harris, actually. But look, here's the thing.
Donald Trump has the energy to
Did
pull
anybody know
him
who
over.
Tim Kaine was?
No, absolutely not.
I had
But
no idea
here's
who
the
Tim
difference.
Kaine was.
Nobody had a real negative opinion of Pence. Here you've got
Right.
Democrat voters, and 30+% of them already have a negative impression of this woman. I was surprised. I read yesterday when she decided to drop out of the presidential race. She said, in good faith, I can't tell you, my supporters and volunteers, that I have a path forward if I don't believe I do. Oh, ye of little faith, Kamala Harris. You have a path forward, and it's straight through at Joe Biden. And the American people should be very clear on this. The Democrats' candidate for president of the United States is Kamala Harris. Anybody who believes that Joe Biden is going to complete his first term is sorely mistaken. We all know this.
He called
including
himself
the
a transition candidate.
Even the Democratic leadership knows this. So this is their anointed person, Kamala Harris. I think she's got a lot of problems. I think she's a great candidate for us to go against. You know, let's remember she was Attorney General of California. I want people to start asking her exactly what she did to take care of BLM when she was there, to take care of police racism when she was there, to take care of the disproportionate number of African Americans in jails in California, just like everywhere else. I want her to stand up and take her professional experience and show us what she did.
Why would she care about African Americans? She's not African American.
Absolutely not. I am actually. I was watching Fox yesterday. I was watching MSNBC. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. When you go on and you say Kamala Harris is an African American and she satisfies Joe Biden's promise to pick an African American VP, it's a flat out false. You're doing yourself a disservice. You look uneducated when you're talking about that subject, or at least it looks like you're not paying attention.
She is Indian and Jamaican of ethnic origin. Right. And yes, you can make the case that Jamaicans had African heritage, but she's not what we think of, what has always been classified as African American. And even her father, by the way, made a comment. I put the story up on the National Politics Day because guess what? Nobody else wants to run it. That even her father said that he was embarrassed. He called it a travesty the way she treats her ethnicity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it almost looks like you're not proud of what your actual heritage is, or you're grifting on someone else's heritage. It just doesn't look good. Kamala, who are you? What are you?
Well, here's the key thing. The Democratic Party is once again playing three-card Monte or a shell game with people's emotions.
Right.
And they look at the most superficial thing about people, and they figure, oh well, Kamala can fill the role because of just the hue of her skin.
Right.
This is shameful, people,
Yep.
and America needs to wake up. Donald Trump is the populist candidate.
Well, and Joe Biden said that black people were a monolith, and he clearly believes that anybody with a darker skin tone than Jack Maxey is a monolith here in the United States. I guess we'll be keeping an eye on Kamala. Not that I particularly want to, but we will here on The War Room. Make sure you join us tomorrow, 10 a.m. Share out all the stories, all the clips, all across social media. We love you all. See you tomorrow.